Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I think I do it a little bit louder. Is it better now? Yeah, okay. I hear myself, okay. Fine. Good morning, everyone. So first of all, at the beginning, just a question about if you got the idea of the Q&A sessions on Mondays. Do you have any questions to that, to the idea? So we have, maybe just to summarize it again, we have the lecture on Tuesdays, then I will upload the exercises, and so that you can try it by your own. I will upload the video for the solutions, let's say Thursday, Friday, and if you don't get the solutions, then you can ask questions on Monday, on a session between 11:30 and 1. Okay, there's a Teams link. Okay. Okay, so I hope you got the idea at least. So we are not meeting each other in a room. I think there's some in the campus or in Elias, there's some kind of room assigned to the exercise, but it's purely online, okay? Okay, fine. Okay, then let's start with hospitals in detail with the second part of this lecture, and this is where logistics is more interesting than when you try to optimize things, the GP or particular physician. Hospitals are really complex, have interdependent structures, different stakeholders and so on. So this is where optimization and logistical issues are very interesting to consider. And before we go into the mathematical details, we try to understand how hospitals are organized, what is important, how they are financed, and so on. So a little bit boring at the beginning, but after this lecture, I think we hopefully start with the mathematics then afterwards. Okay, so let's try to keep awake for this lecture and then going into mathematics of logistics. Okay, maybe someone is interested in this legal frameworks and so on. I'm not. Okay, but it's important to understand these things for the optimization later on. Okay, and to understand hospitals better, we definitely have to understand the topology and how they're defined. Okay, so what is important for the hospitals? Okay, first of all, the classical start in a topic is to start with a definition. And hospitals are service enterprises which provide healthcare in unity of place, time, and action to personally attendant patients who often stay overnight. And overnight is a crucial thing here because this is called inpatients then. And someone who is leaving the hospital at the same day is called outpatient. So we will need it later. But the whole idea of a hospital is that a hospital provides services. So we are not a production site. We are not producing products. We are rather having as an input a non-healthy patient. And hopefully at the end of the day, at the output, is a healthier patient. And unity is meant that it's not distributed services, but everything is at one place. So the surgeons, the patients, the nurses, and so on. Okay. As I said, hospitals are mainly focused on stationary care, where you stay overnight. This is in contrast to ambulant care, where you simply get a surgery at the same day and leave at the same day. Okay. So this is often used to maintain cost effectiveness, and because also of the reform acts in healthcare. They try to increase the ambulant care instead of stationary care, because then you occupy beds throughout the nights, you occupy capacities, and they want to decrease the cost. And this is why they try to let you home at the same day, if possible. Okay. Okay, we have, of course, on one hand, the medical and nursing issues. We differentiate between general hospitals and specialized hospitals, where you have specialties according, for instance, to type of illness. Let me change it. Where you have the type of illness, for instance, instance, an orthopedic clinic, or you have to differentiate to type of treatment, for instance, homeopathic clinic. So some critical speakers say that homeopathic is not a real medical discipline, but it's under discussion, right? Okay, so we have the general hospitals providing different treatment kinds, and we have specialized hospitals. And then a very important KPI, key performance indicator for hospitals, is the so-called length of stay, which refers to the average number of days a patient stays at a hospital. For instance, when you are in a specialized hospital, they have mainly longer LOS, average length of stay, because they are treating complicated cases or chronic diseases, something like this. And in general hospitals, they have, on average, at least a shorter LOS. Okay. So if you go to a hospital and you can also see the statistics for each hospital, and you see a longer LOS, it could mean it's a worse quality hospital, but not necessarily. We will come to this a little bit later. And we have to differentiate hospitals according to their size. So we have very small hospitals, below 50 beds. So these are highly specialized hospitals, like, for instance, cosmetic surgeries. We have small hospitals up to 200, medium hospitals up to 400, large hospitals up to 650, and very large hospitals beyond 650 beds. Is someone originally coming from Karlsruhe? Okay, just a guess, what do you think the Städtisches Klinikum Karlsruhe, how many beds do they have? The larger one? Yeah, you're right, but it's a really huge one. They have 1,500 beds, so double of this one, and I think the largest one is in Hamburg with 2,000 beds, and obviously to maintain and optimize all the processes is really difficult for such huge hospitals. Okay, then what is very important in hospitals, the medical staff. We have to differentiate physicians that are employees of a hospital, and then we have physicians that are self-employed, freelancers. So for instance, ENT physicians or generologists, they often rent beds from a hospital and also rent surgery rooms and times. But of course, a combination of both is possible, and it's often the case. Okay, then we have to differentiate between the level of care, the classification according to the scope, so the width, how many disciplines are covered by the hospital, and the depth of services, so do they provide only basic treatment or highly sophisticated surgeries, and only used in some federal states, not relevant for Baden-Württemberg anymore, and of course we have different definitions depending on the federal states. And the examples for classification criteria are the number of planned beds, because this is relevant for the size of the hospital, the number, type, and size of specialties, the staff and equipment we have, and the catchment area, which is basically a geographic area and the population from which a hospital draws its patients. So basically market area. So this is their demand, patient demand. They have to cover. And we differentiate between different care levels. So we have basic care. They are really offering just the absolute basis treatments. Standard care, central care, where they rather specialize on, let's say, heart surgeries, something like this. And then we have the maximal care. Often these are university hospitals. They provide every kind of care. And if a hospital cannot provide special care, so if a basic care hospital cannot provide some kind of heart surgery, then the patient is transferred to a central or maximal care hospital, And every hospital has to publish the so-called probability of survival or dying from a surgery. And okay, that works. Okay, so sorry. Okay, they have so the you if you go to a hospital and you get a surgery, you are free to ask for statistics, so the probability of survival, and often the central or maximal care hospitals, they have higher risk of dying. An idea why? Why do they have higher probability of dying? Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. Exactly. So the most difficult and complicated cases are ending up at the maximal care hospitals, and of course, they have a higher death rate, let's say. So that doesn't mean necessarily that they are providing worse treatment, but statistically, they have a higher death risk because they are dealing with the most complicated cases. Okay. Then who owns the hospital? This is also important before we start to optimize logistical processes. We differentiate between the public ownership. So we have some kind of regional authorities, federation, federal state, region, county, community, and then some regional authorities are merged together. So for instance, in working groups, special purpose associations, and so on. And then we have social insurance carrier, so the state insurance agencies, labor unions, and one of the examples is this Städtische Klinikum Karlsruhe with 1,500 beds, for instance, which is a huge one, and Stadtklinik Baden-Baden. Then we have the non-profit hospitals, free welfare work, parishes, foundations, some kind of associations. In Karlsruhe we have the Diakonissen Krankenhaus as an example. And then, of course, we have these private hospitals. They are definitely for profit, and they are run as a normal business enterprise, which, by the way, is obliged to have, of course, a concession. And again, in Karlsruhe, we have the example of Paracelsus, Karlsruhe, or Rheumazentrum in Baden-Baden. And they are often specialized hospitals, and they, of course, they look rather where is the highest profit. So cosmetic surgery is a really good example, and also Rheumazentrum. Okay, this is the most profit behind that. Okay, and then we differentiate between the level of care and now the intensity of care. So we have the acute care hospitals, and here we have to differentiate between the inpatient and outpatients. As you remember, inpatients are stationary, so they often stay overnight, and outpatient are ambulatory, and they can go home the same day. So acute care hospitals treat both types of patients, and of course they have day and night receptiveness. And not all hospitals have an emergency department, by the way. Okay. Then we have the long-term care hospitals. They specialize in treating patients who have complex medical conditions that require some kind of longer hospital stay, typically more than 25 days, which is really long. And these hospitals are equipped to provide some kind of extended medical care for patients who are recovering, for instance, from serious illness or injuries, and they require ongoing treatment and monitoring. Okay. in contrast, we have hospitals for chronically ill patients, such as Alzheimer, cancer, arthritis, something like this. They also need intensive long-term care, but they need a little medical attention, okay? And this is some kind of a transition space where they are moved and transferred to intensive nursing homes later on. Okay. Okay, some hospital statistics, especially for Germany. We see that the number of hospitals and the number of beds have decreased over the last 20 years. And we can see here also that maybe I can ask you, what do you think, why the number is decreasing? I mean, we have older population, we have climate change with more complex diseases. Shouldn't we have an increasing trend? We have more chronically ill patients. Someone, an idea why? Yep. Sorry? Yeah. But the question is why? Why do we decrease the offers? Why do we try to decrease the number of beds and hospitals? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for your answers. I won't repeat it so that you have an incentive to come back, because you won't be heard on the, on the video. So come here to attend the lecture, and then you will also listen to your colleagues. So absolutely right. So we have this decreasing number of beds and hospitals due to your explanations. And when you see the development of hospitals by ownership, 20 years ago we had a clear majority of public stated hospitals. We had some non-profit hospitals, but the number of privately owned ones were really, really low. And you see this significant increase in the last 20 years, and on the other hand, the decrease of public and non-profit hospitals. And I think up since 2014, we have more private hospitals in Germany than the public ones. Okay, which means that they're profitable. And if you would like to be an entrepreneur, you see that maybe it makes sense to open also private hospital. Yeah. And after you know the logistical issues and how to optimize things, you can run private successfully. Okay. So okay, but you see the number of so in general the number of hospitals are decreasing, but you see the private ones are increasing. Okay. Of course, they are better organized, can make more profits, okay, and are more successful than the public ones. Okay, when you look at the utilization of hospitals bed, which is basically a measure of how many patients are being served compared to the total number of available beds, then you see here a utilization rate of 80%. Someone has an idea why this drop here is coming from 2019 to 2020? Yeah. Exactly. Corona hit, and we had this decline in utilization. So let's say 80% of our beds are occupied by patients, and this is, so in Germany we are pretty famous for having a relatively low utilization rate. So in UK, when you look at UK hospitals, they are nearly at 100%. And research has shown that the best occupation rate is rather around 70%. Do you know why, or do you have an idea why it's beneficial to have a lower utilization rate? So we have 100 beds, and 70 are occupied by patients, and 30 beds are empty. Why could that be beneficial, please? Exactly. So the problem in different and other industries is that we have to deal with a high uncertainty in demand. Okay, so on average, we should have 70% occupation rate, so to deal with unexpected emergency cases. Okay, because the emergency case is actually the normal case in hospitals. Okay, so to account for that, you should always have this kind of buffer above. Okay, so as I said, we have, at least in last years, we had a better utilization rate, different than in UK, but because the number of hospitals are decreasing, we will have an increasing occupation rate, obviously. So the development of case numbers in hospitals, so case means simply different illnesses treated, and you can see that we have here an increase. So till Corona at least, hospitals have shown that they're more efficient and also more individualized. Okay, we can treat different illnesses. So here we have a slightly increase at least. The occupation days in millions, so this is basically the total number of days patients have occupied a bed over a given period of time. So here for years per year, and you can also see the decline of the total number of occupation days. Okay. Because we said at the beginning they want to have more ambulatory cases so that they leave at the same day, so they don't occupy beds, they don't occupy capacities unnecessarily. Okay, so this is why they try at least to decrease these occupation days. And the key performance indicator loss, so the length of stay, you can also see that an average number, so 30 years ago, we had an average day of, let's say, almost 2 weeks, and nowadays we have an average length of stay about one week. So over the last 30 years it was halved. And the average number of days that the patients spent in the hospital has decreased, and is basically calculated by dividing the total number of stays by the number of patients. Okay, and if we have less beds, as we just seen, then LOS, the length of stay, should also go down. So this makes sense. Okay. And at the beginning, so 30 years ago, it was pretty profitable, because at the beginning you have a very intensive care. So the patient is coming in, has an injury, surgery is needed, and so on. But after that, it's simply monitoring, maybe changing bandage or something like this. So they got money, and the patient was not really heavily treated. Okay, so was just lying around basically. And nowadays, the budget and financing scheme is different. We will come to that, and this is why they try to avoid too long length of stays. Okay, so how do they plan and how do they get the budget? Again, these legal frameworks. So we have, of course, a Hospital Financing Act, which is basically running costs that are covered by hospital insurance companies. But the building, the repairing, maintaining of hospitals, these are done by federal states. Okay. And what is important is we have this trade-off between efficiency on one hand, so we want to have a shorter stay of length, we want to have less capacity used, but at the same way, we need this kind of equity. So we want to ensure equal access to care for everyone. Okay, it's not that easy to go for both. Okay. So the planning, so the implementation and application of this law is up to the state hospital laws. Okay, so we have the legal framework from above, and then we have the state hospital laws, and we have the control element, of course, of the federal states for regulation, and each hospital has the right to be heard if they want to enter the state hospital plan, so that they want to build a hospital so that they then can offer treatment to publicly insured patients, but this has to be done in coordination with neighboring federal states. So for instance, in Karlsruhe, the Städtische Klinik Karlsruhe has a high percentage of patients that are coming from Rhineland-Pfalz, okay, so from neighboring federal states, and that has to be taken also into account. And we have the inclusion in the state hospital plan by an official notification, of course, based on public funding for investments. Then we have the approval of hospital healthcare according to some kind of code book, 5 in this case. So the public health insurance only allow treatment in hospitals in the state hospital plan for publicly insured patients. So if the hospital is in the state hospital plan and has an agreement with the insurance companies, then they can also treat publicly insured patients, and then they get the costs covered. And the care agreement, care rate agreement means nothing else than hospitals negotiate these rates with the insurance companies. Okay. Okay. Nothing fancy. Then again, we have some main legal basis of hospital financing. We have, of course, the Hospital Financing Act, Hospital Reimbursement Act. So this is mainly for the variable costs. Then we have the Social Security State, Book 5, and the state hospital law. So the Hospital Financing Act is above that, and then we have on the lower level, the state hospital laws. And in Germany, we have this classical dual financing. On one hand, we have the public authorities that cover investment costs, okay? And often, hospitals cannot go to the public authority and say, we would like to digitalize our process more, okay? So this is not how it works. So we have an investment backlog, so they cannot invest because they don't have the necessary support from the authorities. Then, on the other hand, we have the health insurance. They are basically covering the operating costs. And we have the problem that we have restricted operational and economic autonomy. So we are not allowed to have investments for rationalization. So that means if we want, as I said, to digitalize our hospital now to save money later, this is not how it works. Okay? There's no such investment here. Okay, so we have the acquisition costs, which are on long-term investments, and then we have operating costs that are covered by the health insurance. And basically, we have this hospital enlisted in the hospital plan, and we have 2 types of contribution getting from. So we have the taxpayer. This is everyone, hopefully, in this country, so everyone has to pay taxes to the federal state, and they cover the investment costs of hospitals. And then on the other hand, we have, for instance, the publicly insured patients, And we know from the previous lecture, half of these costs are covered by the employer, and half we have to pay to the health insurance directly, and they cover the operational costs. And then we have the private insured patients, and they pay directly the bills provided by the hospital. Okay, and then after 2004, the so-called diagnosis-related groups, DRG system, was introduced, because before that, hospitals had a lack of incentives for some kind of economic behavior due to cost-covering principles. So, which means they waited till the patients were coming in, and then let's see how the costs are rising, and then someone is paying for that. And so this is why we had these long length of stays. They had no incentives to send them home. They had no incentives to make the process more optimal, because they knew the costs will be covered in any case. Okay, and then we had this diagnosis-related groups system introduced in 2004, which is rather performance-based reimbursement system, and not all costs are covered. And these reimbursements, costs and rates, are calculated based on the groups, which means patients or cases are assigned to a particular group, and the costs for these groups are then covered. Okay, and this is the same for public and privately insured patients. So every patient coming into the hospital will be assigned to some kind of DRG group. And we had indeed a sustainable improvement of quality, transparency, and efficiency, because, for instance, the length of stay was reduced significantly, okay, because they had this incentive to be more efficient in their processes. Okay, so we have exogenous given prices. The hospitals cannot determine their own price structure, but of course, as always, we have some kind of exceptions. We have these supplementary services, especially if you are publicly insured patient, you can be treated by the chief physician. I'm not sure if this is really better, but it's definitely more expensive. And if you would like to have a single room, you can also pay for that in addition. On the other, we have also discounts and surcharges, but this is hospital-specific and treatment-specific. Let's go for an example. So, as I said, this is basically an economic classification system. A patient is coming in, and this patient is then assigned to a particular group with similar average costs. So, of course, at the beginning, we have a main diagnosis. So, why the patient is coming in. Then major diagnostic category, if they need a surgery or some kind of medical treatment or orthopedic treatments, what kind of procedure is necessary. Then we have a secondary diagnosis, and then we have this patient clinical complexity level. This is simply a framework used to assess how complex a patient's clinical situation is. Okay, so that might take into account the number and severity of medical conditions, the level of care required, the expected resources needed for treatment, and so on. So, for instance, a patient with, let's say, several acute and chronic conditions, such as, on the one hand, the chronic health failure, on the other hand, renal failure, and in addition, they have a diabetes problem. Okay, and then he's presenting also sepsis. Okay, so, and this patient would then, of course, require a multidisciplinary care. Okay, maybe in an intensive care setting, or with a very high risk for complications, and then we, of course, need a detailed care plan for this patient. Okay, and such a scale can help hospitals to prioritize care, allocate resources, plan for patient discharges, and so on. And of course, insurance companies would like to assign the lowest risk level so that they have to pay less cost, and the hospital has another incentive. Of course, they would like to go for the opposite, so that is a very complicated case. This is a particular special patient to get more money from the health agencies, for the insurance agencies. And then, of course, we have this additional coding, age and weight and so on. Okay, and then we have this grouper, so the automatic, and this is very fancy for German systems. We are lagging behind in digitalization, so this is pretty fancy to have an automatic assignment of cases to a DRG. Okay. Questions? Okay. Sorry. Okay, so what about the financing, right? So we have on one hand the cost weight. This is the relative economic effort of patient treatment regarding a specific DRG group in proportion to a basic patient. So basically, how much more do I have to do with this patient compared to a standard patient? So basically, it's percentage deviation from the basic case. Okay. And then these cost weights are simply summed up for each number of cases to get a case mix, which is basically a measure of composition. Okay, so we know all the different cases, different illnesses, different DRG groups. Okay, and then what we want to have is to get an index, which is basically the average complexity level. So we take all our cost weights, sum them up to case mix, okay, this is in the denominator, and dividing it by the number of cases per period in a hospital, and we get the so-called case mix index, and this gives us basically the average case mix. And then we can compare our case with this average index. So again, we see that the more complicated cases, so the case mix index in rather larger hospitals is higher, above 1, than smaller hospitals, which are below 1. And then if you have and you run a hospital, you can compare your own index with these ones, okay? And as I said, the more complicated cases are often in these larger hospitals. And how to determine the budget? At the end of the day, the DRG budget is nothing else than the case mix multiplied by the base rate, which is funny, which is constant for every federal state, which is really unusual for Germany. So that means you have a case mix which is given in percentage, and then you multiply it by cost rate, okay, for your basic patient to get then the overall budget in monetary units. Okay. And of course, as always, we have some kind of assumptions. We have special cases that are not integrated in the DRG system. So for instance, at the beginning of the corona crisis, we didn't know how to assign corona patients. We didn't know their rates of healing, the complications, and the consequences of corona, for not only for the particular patient, but also the infection rate and so on. So at the beginning, they didn't know exactly where to assign these corona patients. Readmissions into hospitals. So if a surgery went wrong, then you will get different budget than before, although it's the same DRG. So, for instance, if you have readmissions in other industries, you can reclaim basically the product because it's covered by the warranty. Okay, it's for free. Okay, so here it's a bit the same, and I promised Professor Nickel to tell at least one joke in this lecture or in this lecture series, so I will go for it. So let me think about it. So surgeon is coming after the surgery to the patient and saying, I have a good and a bad news. for you, and then the patient say, okay, go for the bad news first, and the surgeon said that we have amputated the wrong leg, and the patient is screaming and say, okay, what is the good one? Then he said, okay, the other one is done for free. Okay. So you can decide if this is funny or not. I can give it back to Professor Nickel then at the end. Okay, so if you have a readmission, you will get a different budget for that. Then different transfers, and if you have exceptional LOS length of stay, either you are below or above the so-called trim point. So here are the average length of stay, the usual ones. If you are below this trim point, then you get discounts. So if the patient is leaving your hospital earlier than expected, and you get day outliers if your patient is staying longer than expected, and you get extra payment. So these are where you get different budgets. Okay, so you have discounts if you have a lower LOS under this trim point, and you have surcharges if you have longer LOS. Okay, so of course we love these kind of principles of contribution rate stability in Germany. This is basically a policy that aims to maintain stable contribution rates for statutory health insurance companies and schemes. This is basically an attempt to control costs within the healthcare system, okay? So that publicly insured patients, basically we at the end, we don't have to pay more, and it's prevented that the increase of contribution is then covered by the members, so basically by the publicly insured patients. Okay, so that means the cost increases which exceed a particular contribution part from especially health insured people have to be settled by the hospital, okay? They have to cover these extra costs, the hospitals, okay? So if life expectancy increases, hospitals have to be more efficient, okay, to get the same amount of money, okay? And they have to bear the additional costs. This is why they are forced to be more efficient. The good thing is that leadership behavior is changing. Before 2004, before this DRG system was in place, we had a very reactive administration, so we simply waited till the patient was coming, treated, leaving, and then the costs were covered, so nothing special happened. So we simply had this kind of waiting attitude, and after the 2004 DRG system was involved and introduced, we have a rather proactive management, and that means, for instance, that the case mixes are planned, so they are not surprised, but oh, why we have now much more heart surgeries than something else, so they can plan it rather. So if they specialize their departments and they advertise that we are a special hospital for heart treatments, then they can adjust their demand, okay? Which patient is coming, which cases are coming into their hospital. Okay, so these were the hospital's definition, topology, so the terms that we have to use, how it's financed. Yeah, please. You mean nowadays, what Lauterbach is doing? That's a good. So first of all, there are no stupid questions, and second, so yeah, this is a good point. So what Lauterbach is trying to do is he would like to stop the closures of hospitals, especially on rural areas, like you mentioned that already. He would like to have larger hospitals, but at the same time that in rural areas the hospitals are still open and provide some kind of basic. So he wants to have large specialized hospitals and basic care on in the rural areas. However, no one is, so there are, of course, huge critics because they say that won't stop the closing hospitals. He wants to go away from these Pauschbeträge so that they get money for particular treatments. He wants that they get money in general. So they don't have to perform, they will get their money to cover the costs. As an economist, I'm skeptical because if hospitals don't get the incentive and they know the costs will be covered, they won't be very profitable. But no one knows, but this is the idea of Lauterbach. So he wants to stop the closures of hospitals. He wants to rescue these smaller rural hospitals. But at the end, how it will play out, no one knows. So, as I said, from the economical point of view, it's difficult to say. Yeah. The DRG is only saying which case is assigned to which group, and the financing might change a bit, so that they don't get for this particular case a fixed rate, but it could be flexible plus the fixed rates in general. That could happen, that the financing is a bit changing. But the DRG system is only, to assign patients to groups. With, but good point, right? Okay, let's start with hospital logistics. Maybe you've heard about that patients often disappear in hospitals. So let me show you the most important parts within the text. So a patient was stuck in a defective elevator in Berlin for 3 days, and nobody noticed it. He was simply lost. Even a police search has not been successful, and for 3 days, nobody in the hospital noticed that the elevator didn't work. Okay, and for someone seeing it first time, it's really funny, right? And it's basically it's ridiculous how to lose a patient. Okay, so in a car company, never would happen like that. If you have a production line, you have everywhere codes, and you cannot lose a part or a product or even not the equipment. Everything is digitalized, and you should know where the equipment, the products, the assembly things are. In hospitals, it's pretty often that patients are lost. Okay, so I think a few years ago in America, there was a patient. She was heavily smoking patient, and she left the department and to smoke. What she didn't know was that you couldn't open the door from outside, only from inside. And it was in the middle of winter, and no one noticed it again. And she was found in the morning, but she died because of the freezing temperatures. Okay, so I mean, if I would be happy if I would go to a hospital and I would go get a barcode so that they won't forget me, they won't lose me. I would be happy, so I wouldn't have anything against it. But of course, we have this data protection things that we have to take also into account. But I could get a number, okay, and the number is lost, so that should raise a warning and the rescue team, basically. Okay. So, of what often happens also, these are more dramatic cases, but what is also often which is pretty common, is that they simply forget patients. Okay, they are in a waiting room for hours and hours and hours, and no one cares, and no one realizes that they simply slipped through the process, and they could also die in front of them, and no one would realize that. Okay, so what is hospital logistics? Hospital logistics describes the efficient planning, the realization and control of patient, material, and information flow within a hospital, as well as the patient's stay in a hospital. If you would look into a classical logistics book, it's basically the same also for different companies, only that here we have patients instead of products or material. Okay. And so what we want to know is where is the patient, in which department, which department is next, and so on. Then we have the material flows. So if you have a surgery, for instance, and you take a piece of calcium out, this has to be checked, right? And it has to be stored. And this often takes much too long. That could be improved. Also in the information flow, we have this digitalization process, but still nowadays in German hospitals, everyone is writing things down with pen and paper, basically, which is, again, ridiculous. Okay, then we have the direct and also indirect non-medical services. So direct, of course, we have the patient transportation from A to B to C and then to the discharge. And we have the indirect services. So we have the storage material, medication, cancer test results and whatever, and the transport of medical goods. Okay. What are the planning tasks? These are really multifaceted ones. So, of course, we have capacity that has to be planned, surgery rooms, nurses, and so on. We have appointment planning, which case should be treated at which point in time, at which department, and so on. Transportation planning within the hospital, but also between hospitals. Operating room planning. Often you have a surgery scheduled, let's say from 1 to 3, but it's complicated, so they have overrun times and they finish much later than expected, and the next one is waiting. Nurse scheduling, nurse rostering, of course. How many nurses do I need? Where, at which department, at which time, with which kind of qualification, skills, and so on. Layout planning. Do we have to change our layout within the hospital? Is this really efficient? Should the patient feel comfortable, or should it be rather more efficient? Do you have some questions over there? No? Okay. And then the last one is inventory management. We have to cool medication, blood reserves, for instance. We have to have enough mask oxygens, and so on and so on. Okay, which is also, again, very complicated. And what I would like to emphasize is that we don't want to optimize the medical treatment itself. So we don't want to interfere with physicians. Okay, they should do their job. Okay, what we want to do is that we support that the medical equipment, nurses, rooms are ready when they need it. Okay, so this is our task basically, so that they can do their job. And the objectives of our logistics is, of course, good medical care without changing the medical care itself, obviously. And we want to have minimal resource usage of non-value added activities. That is simply those that are irrelevant for the healing process. And we want to increase customer satisfaction, in particularly by reducing waiting times. By the way, do you know, some years ago there was a study, and the patients were asked, which is the most important thing in hospitals? You would say, after that, you had a good stay. Okay. So what would you say was the most important thing for patients? There was a study, and maybe you have an idea. So maybe what would be important for you? Yeah. Exactly. Other ideas? Exactly. So food was the most important thing for patients, and after that, on the second place, were the waiting times, to reduce the waiting times. This is funny because someone would maybe expect that the success of the surgery is the most important thing, but patients are expecting that the surgery went well. This is something that they expect, that they want to have. This is nothing that, and also I don't know anyone who says, oh, the second time it was okay, the surgery. First time it was not that, but the second time I felt better. So no one cared. No one wanted to have a second surgery. No one want to have complications. So this is taken simply for granted, okay? So food and waiting times were the most important thing for customer satisfaction. Okay. Then what kind of requirements, or let's say constraints, do we have to take into account? So modern planning processes, they try to meet the needs of multiple stakeholders: physicians, nurses, patients, visitors, hospital administration. So this is different than in other industries. Hospitals or in healthcare in general has more stakeholders than every other industry. So for instance, visitors, they often occupy the elevators, okay? Not the staff, not the patients, the visitors, okay? So this we have to take into account when we plan and optimize hospital logistics, okay? Then quick response to exceptional and unforeseeable incidents, so mass casualty events, okay? So as I said before, emergency cases or emergency case is actually the normal case in a hospital, and still hospitals have to treat them properly. They have to deal with these capacity fluctuations and also peak loads, okay? If we have a mass accident, then we have somehow to make the capacity free to meet the demands of this sudden surge in demand, okay? Okay, which is not easy to handle in logistics, especially the uncertainty involved here. Okay, and the last topic for today is the clinical path. Okay, this is basically how the patient is going through the different departments in a hospital, okay? So they want to have a smooth and tightened processes, and the better they are in this, then this is seen as a competitive factor because the waiting times are reduced and patient satisfaction is achieved, okay? So patients would go rather to this hospital then. Process optimization is of course essential in hospitals, using DRG, which is relevant for everyone, and the identification of bottlenecks in inefficient organizational structures. Okay, so this is what we want to understand. If we know the bottlenecks, we can optimize it based on these bottlenecks. And the overall goal is basically is to improve the clinical workflow using suitable and efficient processes. And what we always want to have in logistics is standardization, okay, which is a very common goal. Refers simply to the use of consistent, uniform, and repeatable methods, procedures, processes, and so on, in order simply to ensure efficiency and cost effectiveness. This is always what we want to try to achieve in logistics. Exactly. So, how is clinical path defined? It's also has actually a lot of synonyms: critical path, critical pathways, or care path. And these are management plans that display goals for patients and provide optimal sequence and timing of actions necessary to minimize delays and resource utilization and to maximize the quality of care, okay? So to achieve optimal efficiency. And if you read this down, you hear that this is a classical operations research topic. We want to minimize things and we want to maximize the quality of care. So we try to find decisions that are optimal in sequencing and timing for actions. Okay, so what we are doing is basically real mathematical optimization. Often you hear politicians saying we are optimizing things, and you always say, no, you are not doing that because your decisions are not based on quantitative measures, facts, and so on. You are simply think that you optimize things, you improve things, but you cannot prove that you found the minimum or the optimum. Okay, so be cautious with politicians. Okay, the objectives are increasing the quality, of course, planning, standardization, optimization of medical care chains. We want to integrate all disciplines and groups. We want to optimize and also make costs transparent. We want to compare with benchmarks, examples, of course, improving documentation, and at the end of the day, increase patient satisfaction and also provide the information for patients that are needed to make good decisions also from the patient's point of view. Okay, so that they can decide which hospital is most optimal for my purposes and needs. Okay, this is a very classical path. So we have a pre-admission, which is ambulant. So if you have a surgery planned, you go first of all to the hospital to have a preparation talk about what is needed on the day of surgery, what kind of documents you need, and so on. So what is needed for your stay in the hospital. Then the day of admission, so we have the pre-operative phase. Maybe you need some kind of additional diagnosis and tests, blood tests, whatever, blood pressure tests. Then you have the day of surgery and the post-operative phase. And then finally, you can be discharged. And afterwards, it might be needed that you are coming back to change bandage or to test if everything went fine. Okay. And the fields of action is pretty many facets again: interface management, communication, collaboration, quality, time, research, risk, and documentation. And it's actually not really long ago that documentation management was the most important part, okay, and the risk management, because we want to have the documentation in such a way that it's really difficult for the patient to sue us. Okay, so these are only legal considerations. Okay, so that we don't have a legal case here. So these both were the most important fields of action. Okay, but nowadays we open that. Okay. Example maybe, so a patient is coming into the hospital in a waiting room. We have admission staff that takes your documentation. You have signed some kind of papers and so on. Then you have to change, undress, whatever, and you go for the first medical case and check. There's a physician that is checking your maybe basic blood pressure, whatever, basic things. Then, based on this first medical check, it's decided if you need an X-ray, some kind of electrocardiogram, or some kind of laboratory test. Another physician is doing that. And based on that, you need a final consultation by a senior physician, and then it's decided if you can be discharged or if you have to go to the patient unit, and then maybe surgery is then planned, and so on and so on. Okay. And before that one, I had actually another example, but it was in German, so I've changed it on short notice using a general stroke clinical pathway. This was obtained by the, I think that was the Charing Cross Hospital in London. I think it belongs to the Imperial College one. So we have the pre-hospital phase. So an ambulance scheduled by the LAS, I think this is the London Ambulance Service, and picks up the patient, or it comes from home, again picked up by the LAS, and then there's some kind of fast test. I'm not sure if I can, I know the abbreviation, so some kind of fitness and scoring template. I think but the FAST test is carried out, and depending on that one, either the patient is sent to the accident and emergency department and referred to the stroke team if the FAST test shows that the patient has a stroke, or otherwise it goes to a normal. So this is the stroke team basically. This is the normal A&E emergency department. And next, if the patient is further diagnosed to have a stroke, then they will be sent to a CT scan. Okay. Otherwise, they are transported again to the normal emergency department. Okay. And if a CT scan, so if we are here, and if the CT scan shows that the patient doesn't have a stroke, you will switch to a non-stroke treatment department. So some kind of other, leaving the system basically. And then we have to differentiate between different strokes. So either it's a sorry for the pronunciation, so either it goes this direction or that one. Okay, so if it is the ischematic, then it needs additional test, and then basically it's decided if the patient is going to the hyper acute stroke unit HASU or not. Okay, and then finally the patient is discharged either from the hospital to go home, or maybe it goes to the community therapy team. Okay, so this is an example using a stroke clinical pathway in London, but it's very similar to the German system. Okay, the German path, clinical path. Okay, so we have different paths that we can consider from the logistical point of view, basically. So either we can have a serial treatment, so patient is treated in different treatments successively. So for instance, first of all, very conservative treatment with maybe medication. And then if there's no improvement, then it goes to a second department, maybe the surgical department. Or it could be also that a patient similar to medical problems are treated parallel by two departments. Okay, so for instance, obtaining expert opinion from another department, or if you are lying in an MRI scanner, then at the same time your blood results are evaluated, something like this. Or it could be a team treatment, so if a patient has several diseases or multifaceted one, then several departments are working at the same time, maybe cancer treatment by oncologists and internists at the same time. So the patient treatment is covered by different departments. Or it could be a cyclical treatment or periodical treatment. So for instance, you have a diabetes patient. He needs to see the family doctor 10 times a year. Okay, so it goes through the first department on a periodical level. And then, let's say, one time per year, once a year, he has to go to a second department to get special treatment or additional treatment. Okay, so you have also here this kind of cycle involved. Okay, so currently, or the current implementation, they often lack the aspect of optimization or logistical integration. So first of all, the physicians, if we talk to physicians in hospitals, they don't know that they have different pathways. So they don't know that two different departments are treating the patient at the same time, or periodically, or sequentially. So they don't really know what they're doing. They simply get into some kind of room and they are treating that, but they even don't know that something could be optimized in their processes. Okay, so if you see and look at the discharge process, okay, at the end of your treatment, at the day of discharge, you get a discharge letter. Then you have to fill out a quality management sheet for the hospital, and then your bandages will be changed or something like that. So the question is, who's responsible for which process? Could that be optimized? So if in each action and each process another nurse maybe is involved, is this really optimal? Then how long do the processes take? Okay. So time is very crucial here, because if the patient is leaving, he has to leave as fast as possible to free the bed for the next patient, because the next patients are waiting. We have, in England it's even worse, but also in Germany we have a long list, waiting list for patients waiting for standard surgery, for instance hip surgery or knee surgeries, that they're waiting for ages. So what is time is very crucial. Then what are the dependencies within these processes? What about rooms and resources? Is the discharge letter issued in another department, and then the patient has to leave the room and fill out the sheet somewhere else, and then changing again the room to change bandages and so on? Is the sequencing obligatory? So is it really necessary that the patient is first getting the discharge letter, then fill out and then change bandage? Could it be done in parallel, or could we change the order? Again, how many persons are involved? Can different processes run at the same time? Can we have these ones in getting done in parallel? And are there any problems concerning interfaces and communication? Often what happens is that departments are not talking to each other, the physicians are not talking to each other, and the patient has to repeat his symptoms or whatever, or conditions again and again and again to different people. So, and of course, information is then lost. Okay, and within this clinical path, we have many logistical things that we could optimize. We have the staffing, shift allocation, which is, of course, assigned to different departments. We have the appointment planning, when the patient should come in optimal way so that no one has to wait too much. Patient transportation within departments, and of course the operating room planning. This is, by the way, the bottleneck in most hospitals, that they don't have so many operating rooms and maybe not enough staff. Okay, and then of course the classical logistical capacity planning, that we have enough capacity, enough rooms, enough equipment, enough medical drugs and so on to treat the patients in different departments. Okay, so I think that's one of the last ones. So difference compared to industrial production processes. We have, as mentioned before, a high degree of uncertainty involved. We never know what kind of patients and cases will come. We have extremely high dependencies within the hospitals, within the departments. It's extremely difficult to predict demand, for medication, for instance. We have the varying length of treatment from patient to patient. So even if they have the same illness, some patient could heal instantly and can leave the hospital on the same day. Someone has to stay for 2 weeks or whatever. And the integration of emergencies in the regular schedule and surgery plans. Okay, and this is the basic problem for physicians when introducing these clinical paths. So they are afraid that the medical needs, what the patient is needed, and the economical restrictions are tearing hospitals basically apart. But so in our opinion, from the operations research perspective, if we use OR techniques and business analytics techniques, basically mathematics, we can minimize or even overcome this gap and glue it basically together again. Okay, so that's it for today. If you don't have any questions, then let's start with the mathematical part finally next week. Okay. So see you either on Monday or on Tuesday. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.